What does it mean to observe without the observer? To understand when the observer is not, you must first understand what the observer is. The observer is you, the thing that is looking at me right now. When I show you this object and ask you what color it was, you can answer black. You can answer because you saw the object in my hand in the past, and that perception became part of you. You were then able to draw on that part of yourself to answer the question. Any object I show you becomes part of you. So how does this work? When you see this object, it becomes part of you. When you see this object, it becomes part of memory. Therefore, you are memory. Memory is the observer. The statement "observe without the observer" references the absence of the observer. To be able to identify the absence of the observer, we must first understand how we identify the presence of the observer. The presence of the observer is identified through its activities. Since the observer is memory, the activity of the observer is the activity of memory. Memory has two activities: reaction and interpretation. Reactions take the form of thoughts, emotions, and gestures. Anxiety is a reaction, laughter is a reaction, and when I asked you what colour the object was and you answered black, that answer was also a reaction. When you listen to me now, you derive meaning from my words. You can do this because you know English. Your knowledge of English gives meaning to the words. You interpret sound according to knowledge to generate meaning. When you do not understand the language being spoken, you are unable to interpret the sound into meaning, so you experience only sound. Interpretation and reaction are related. You react to the interpretation of what you see. For instance, you run away from a tiger not because you see it as orange, but because you interpret it as dangerous. You can understand the statement "observe without the observer" simply by listening to me. You can listen to me without reacting to what I'm saying. You just listen. However, while you are listening, you are still interpreting the sounds I am making and experiencing the meaning of my words. So the observer remains present in the form of interpretation. The statement "observe without the observer" references the observer in the context of reactions and not interpretations. So the statement "observe without the observer" is analogous to the statement "observe without the reactions." Krishnamurti said this to highlight how our reactions can distort thinking and perception. For instance, when someone hates another, their perception will be distorted by a continuous stream of negative thoughts about them. While reactions can distort perception, we must not fall into the trap of thinking all reactions distort perception, because this would lead to the assumption that no reaction was always the right reaction. But this is not true, because in some cases reactions assist perception. For instance, when you are trying to solve a technical problem, your mind is responding to the situation by creating a continuous stream of thoughts that assist you in understanding the problem. Krishnamurti was always speaking psychologically, so his insistence on no reaction was in the context of our relationship to thought. Thought can be observed most clearly when we are not trying to control it or escape from it. The activity of knowledge is far more subtle than we realize. In fact, as we learn more about ourselves, we learn more about the subtle ways knowledge weaves its way into our experience. Knowledge works through accumulation, and knowledge is accumulated in two different places. Knowledge accumulates in memory. For instance, what we see and hear is recorded into memory. Knowledge accumulates in the mind. For instance, a thought is the appearance of knowledge in the mind. Knowledge continually enters the mind to create a stream of thoughts that are superimposed upon perception, thereby influencing our relationships and actions. The accumulation of knowledge in the mind creates a concentration of energy that we experience as a center. The center is the conditioned part of our mind. It is the place where thoughts emanate from and where emotions build. The center appears to be fixed, but in rare instances of attention, we observe the center completely dissolve and disperse into the space of the mind. Like a drop of ink disperses into water, the center disperses into awareness, and this experience shows us several things. 1. The space of the mind is not thought. It is awareness. 2. When the center disperses into awareness, there is silence. This shows us that silence is not the absence of sound, but the presence of awareness. 3. It shows the center to be an illusion. The center is presented to the mind as the entity doing the thinking, the narrator behind the narration. However, when the center dissolves, the capacity to think remains. This shows us that the center is a movement of thought in a pattern, similar to the way a whirlpool is a movement of water in a pattern. Illusion depends on concealment to sustain itself. This is why attention can dissolve the center by uncovering what is being concealed. The center is dissolved through an act of attention. The requirement for that act of attention is that thought and perception must be acting in total unity, a state Krishnamurti referred to as total attention. The true act of observe without the observer is to observe without the center. That is the requirement for an act of pure perception.